I'm Alex Newman with the New American Magazine, and we are so honored today to have Diane Douglas with us again. She is an incredible person. She spent 4 years as superintendent of public instruction in the state of Arizona, and before that, she served 8 years on a local school board. 2 of those years as president. She has been just very passionate about education for decades, and she's been studying it for decades. So it's an incredible honor to have you with us, Diane. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Alex, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm glad to be part of this discussion.
Oh, well, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much, Diane. So, everybody now all over the country, all over the world, in fact, is obsessed with coronavirus. And so we obviously have to start off with coronavirus. Right now you've got something like 50, 60 million American children stuck at home, right? They've been liberated, is what I call it, from the public school system. What recommendations do you have for parents who are just kind of jumping into homeschooling, totally by accident for the first time? Some of them might not feel comfortable. What do you have to say to them? What should they be doing? How should they be thinking about this?
Well, the first thing I think is they should look at this as the greatest opportunity of their lives to really take a handle on what their children are learning and how they're learning it. In Arizona here, our legislature passed a bill that basically has virtually nothing to do with children, just schools try to keep educating them as best you can from afar. I would recommend that parents look at tried and true things that they can get online. Core knowledge is an excellent example. I've been following that since the early 90s when it first came out and my daughter started in school. There are online resources rather than trying to use things that have been jimmy rigged and thrown together at the drop of a hat. Get true educational resources for your children.
It's my view as well that this is just a tremendous opportunity for parents to try to explore and do something different. See what options are out there, and hey, you never know, you might actually like your homeschooling, and you might actually like being with your children. It could bring your family closer together. So, I think this is a tremendous and historic opportunity. Diane, I know you've studied quite a bit about John Dewey. And for people who are really involved in education, anybody who got an education degree, they know that John Dewey is kind of the founding father of the modern system that we have today. What are your thoughts on John Dewey, Diane, and his role in creating the modern education system, his beliefs, his views, his pedagogy? Is that an appropriate guy to be looking to as kind of the genius who set up our educational system? What do you think?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct. Our teachers today, our prospective teachers in our colleges of education still bow at the altar of John Dewey. And he made no secrets about it. His goal was not to educate Americans, it was to change our system from education to social indoctrination, secular humanism, and to change the course of America. I'm trying to keep it simple so that parents that this is new to it, they really don't understand what's been going on for over 100 years. One of the huge fallacies, in my opinion, in his creation of colleges of education was that he believed that you didn't even have to know your subject matter. Teach teachers how to teach, and they can pick up a book and teach anything. And that's utterly ridiculous. The two things you need to be a great teacher, in my opinion, is know your content inside, outside, upside, downside, every which way. Be an expert because that's what gives you a passion for it, and then be a good communicator.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Diane. And one of the things that John Dewey did that, in my view, was so destructive was resurrecting this whole word method that had been tried out by Horace Mann. And I know you have some experience with that. Would you share a little bit about your experience with that, and kind of what are your thoughts on the whole word now that they have different names for it now, look, say, and the cite method, but basically teaching children to memorize words as if the word itself were a symbol rather than a series of symbols, the letters, each one representing a sound. What are your thoughts on this method of teaching reading and kind of the new innovations that have been added, whole language and this stuff? Is this an appropriate way to teach children how to read? And if not, what should we be doing?
May I share a personal story?
Please do. We'd love to hear a personal story, Diane.
One of my epiphanies in education was when my own daughter started kindergarten. And thankfully, in the district she was in, and I ultimately became a school board member in, they used Spalding Phonics. And the very first class I sat through where they were teaching her how to sound out words, I went, oh my gosh, that's why I struggled with reading. I wouldn't say all my life, I'm a voracious reader now, but all through school I struggled and didn't want to read because I was taught with Dick and Jane, look, say, sight reading, whatever it was. And it doesn't prepare children to read. So that's when I began studying education, began studying phonics. And we had the misfortune here in Arizona that two of our three universities at that time, and now I believe all three, don't train teachers to teach phonics. They teach sight reading. And I've had teachers tell me that, you just can't teach phonics. It disables the students and they'll be learning disabled, which actually the opposite is true. But the same teachers who say that it's drill and kill to teach kids basically 400 arithmetic problems, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, the converse, they somehow think that an elementary, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, 7-year-old child can memorize the thousands of words in their vocabulary by sight. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I don't understand why they don't see the fallacy in their logic. But we have, what is it, the 1950s, believe it or not, before even I was born, that we had why Johnny can't read. We know why he can't read, but our teacher colleges refuse to prepare kids to learn how to read, all because John Dewey didn't want an educated citizenry.
Yeah,
it's all tied to
yeah, it's really such a tragedy, and I can attest to the fact that phonics works really well. We've taught all of our children at home. It takes a couple months, and it's very easy to get them reading the King James Bible. All you got to do is teach them phonics, and they can do it. It's not brain surgery. It's not rocket science, and yet the government's literacy data is just beyond pathetic. Diane, I want to ask you an important question. As I go around America, as I go around the world, I hear from people in conservative areas that, oh, everything is fine here. I know the people in California, I know the schools there in New York and Illinois, I know they're terrible, I know they're brainwashing the kids, but they would never do that in Nebraska or South Carolina, right? I know the local school board member. I know, Sally, Aunt Sally teaches. What do you think? Are conservative states immune from this kind of indoctrination, social engineering, problems with pedagogy, or is this a national or even a global problem?
I can't speak to globally, but I would absolutely agree. It is a national problem. And we see that even on a local level when people will ask about your state education. Oh, our state education system, that's terrible, but my local school is great. Well, no, they're not. And one of my concerns is that people are so dead set on getting the federal Department of Education closed. And I agree wholeheartedly, but they'll think the problem is solved. The problem with government education goes right down to your local school board. I've served on school boards with Republicans who all of a sudden they get around education and they lose their conservative values and they don't look long and hard at what is really going on. Or textbooks that are very inappropriately written, things in the library that children just shouldn't be seeing. It's happening everywhere.
Yeah, it really is, and that's been my experience as well. And nowadays when I go into a conservative state, I get people from the local schools to send me stuff, and it's just as outrageous in conservative states as it is in liberal states. And I think part of it is the education system has been nationalized. Another thing that really has got a lot of parents up in arms, and I've been kind of relieved to see that at least there's some pushback on this front, is the sexualization of children. We found out now, there's a preschool in New York where they're teaching children about transgenderism. In first grade classrooms, second grade classrooms, they're bringing in, drag queens to teach the kids about tolerance. UNESCO has these global sex education standards where they want to teach little kids. I mean, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, things that we can't even say on this video because they're so highly inappropriate. First of all, have you noticed this as well? And second of all, is it a problem? Why is it a problem? And what kind of consequences does this have on children in your experience?
Well, absolutely, it's a problem. The sexualization of children. I wrote 3 or 4 op-eds last legislative session, as we went through it, called There's No Such Thing as Safe Sex for children and no safe sex for children 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, however many I wrote, because my successor, her number one agenda was getting, she called it the no promo homo, by statute against AIDS, that said you couldn't teach homosexual sex as normal sex. And oh, that was the biggest thing. And they got it repealed. And now the door has been thrown wide open here in Arizona for however they want to sexualize our children. But we know it's not safe for them, not physically, not emotionally, not by any single standard. But yet it's part of the secular humanist agenda to break down the family and pull children away from their parents.
Yeah, it really is. Talk a little bit about that, Diane. This, this secular humanism. I know, older Americans who went to school prior to, say, the early 1960s, and even some afterwards. You had renegade schools and teachers that continued praying, that continued reading the Bible. But talk a little bit about that shift from kind of, Christian America with a Christian educational system where the children were expected to pray and read the Bible and, understand at least the basics of God's word. In fact, even the school books, even the textbooks that the children used at school were very, very heavy on, content that talked about God and morality, toward what we have now, which is, completely different. Talk a little bit about that transformation and, what are your thoughts on, was that a good thing, a bad thing? Can it be reversed? What are your thoughts on this area?
Well, not to date myself, but to this day, I very vividly remember when I was in first grade, the day Miss Merrill, my first grade teacher, stopped reading the Bible to us. And we all said, Miss Merrill, you forgot to do something this morning. And she looked around the classroom and said, children, I'm not allowed to anymore. And it has always stayed with me. We have to teach a Christian worldview, a Judeo-Christian worldview to our children. We have to teach them worldviews, period. They have to understand there's a difference between a Christian worldview, a secular humanist worldview, a Marxist worldview, whatever. And if they can't understand those basic premises of human nature and what societies are based on, they can't understand what's going on. And as one of the things I would say today, because people have asked me at different times, what about returning prayer to school? Well, my question in this day and age in America is, whose prayer would we put in school? If you're in Dearborn, Michigan, Christian kids are going to be forced to pray to Allah. And that's a very scary thing. But we have to have that underlying understanding, a little bit redundancy there, apologize. We have to have the underlying concept of the worldviews, make sure our children understand them, and make sure they understand the implications they have on the society that we're living in. And we are doing none of that in our government school.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more with you, Diane. When I talk to young people today, obviously they have a worldview, but they've never actually thought about their worldview. It's just kind of been, instilled in their mind without them even realizing, that that's now the lens through which they view everything. And it's so important. And the fact that people aren't even thinking about it or talking about it, to me, is just tragic. In the few minutes that we have left, Diane, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how important is this issue. I know everybody's got their issue that they're fighting on. We got to save unborn babies, and I'm all about that. We got to protect our gun rights, and I'm all about that too. We got to reduce the size and scope of government. These are all important, but I know you really have focused in on education. I have as well. What makes you think education is so important? Why have you dedicated so much of your time and so much of your life to working in this particular field?
Well, because first, I believe to the bottom of my heart that God gives children to parents, not to government bureaucracies, no matter how well intended those government bureaucracies may be or pretend to be. But what is more important than our children? And I know you have the answer to that in your head too. Everything to understand our gun rights comes from how we educate our children. Do we educate them in the Constitution, the founding of this country, and what's so important about it? How can you value human life if you have a secular humanist view that there is no God and nothing is more important to man than the rules that man makes up for himself, however that may be? Without that educational underpinning, and I mean true education, content knowledge, not this indoctrination that we're throwing at our children now. But if they don't understand all of that, everything else falls apart, and we're seeing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true, Diane. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your insight on this. So, what is the solution, Diane? I mean, say you could, speak to the American people, all of them, right now. What would you propose we do about this very obvious problem that we have right now?
I think we have to get government out of education from the very top to the absolute bottom of it. People believe their locally elected school boards are representing them, but they're actually, I saw a very interesting thing from our Arizona School Board Association. They sent a message to their members yesterday that had the communist clenched fist in it. And these people think they're recognizing, representing you, and that's the message they're receiving. Parents, I pray from this closure that we have, will see that yes, they can educate their children. They can take responsibility for this. I think the biggest stumbling block, and what I've been thinking about so much, and I don't know the answer yet, but I keep kind of figuring out how to work on it, is one of the biggest problems. The reason parents can't take responsibility for the education of their system is because government's running a monopoly, and government can confiscate as much money as it wants to run that monopoly, over which the educrats complain they want to have, even though they're getting no success whatsoever. 56% of our third graders here in Arizona, it may have changed a little bit since I left off, 56% can't read. Almost the same percent can't do basic arithmetic. They can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But yet our educators keep saying, give us more money, give us more money. If we can find a way, and let me back up for a second, as government continues to take more money, that drives up the cost of private education and makes it less affordable to the average parent if they can't homeschool, which is very challenging for many people because of all the taxes we pay. So how do we get the money back in the hands of the parents so they can truly get any type of education they want? And while I think here in Arizona, I think we're the leader for charter schools, or very near the top in charter schools, while that's a minimally better alternative, it's still a government-run school. We've got to get education truly back in the hands of parents, and that will take money and funding without the government telling parents how they can spend it. But people have to realize, as I said, God gave them this gift of children. And that's, people say, oh, but my job is important. My go down the laundry list is important. What on that list can possibly top your children? And to make any sacrifice they need to make for them, they have to do that, because not only are their children dependent upon it, but our country is dependent upon it.
Amen. Hey, Diane, thank you so much again for everything you've done and everything you're doing. Thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your insights. Can't tell you how much we appreciate it. God bless you, and hopefully we will be back in touch very soon. Thanks, folks. Make sure you share and like this video. YouTube is doing everything possible to keep us shut down. They'll never recommend our videos to anyone, so we really depend on you to get this message out. Stay tuned. Make sure you share and subscribe. Thanks again, and God bless.